Nice. We have over 40 people already there. So let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Arvind Sahai. I teach here at IIM Ahmedabad, and I lead the NSE Center for Behavioral Science. I am primarily here today to introduce to you our distinguished speaker for the day, which is Professor Jyoti Kumar from the IITD UX Lab. Professor Kumar has been teaching UX and design at IIT Delhi since 2010. He has a bachelor's and a doctoral degree from IIT Guwahati. He also has a unique experience of having spent time in industry. Students. The talk today is on the UX experience, the user interface experience. Now, why is that an important topic, and why is the Center for Behavioral Science requesting Professor Kumar to talk to us on that? Because increasingly, we are engaging with products and services and the purchase process through an interface, the electronic interface online. And part of that experience, therefore, is what we see as we engage with the online experience. Right now, we are also looking at a particular presentation through an electronic interface, which is the Zoom experience. When you're going to a particular site like Amazon or Flipkart, you are experiencing stuff, and the design of the UX over there can lead to particular decisions. And so good UX means essentially good business. And that good business is a function from a behavioral science perspective of what are the decisions which are being made in the mind of the customer as they engage with the particular user reaction, and he's done many other interesting things. So I'm going to request him to give us a talk for around 40-45 minutes, after which we will open it up for questions and answers. And looking forward to a very, very interesting talk, Professor Kumar. So over to you, sir. And
Thank you so much.
The audience, and I hope you will allow me some questions towards the end as well.
Absolutely. In fact, I would like to interact more to the questions than the slides, because today there is a lot of information, but fewer places where we can discuss. So we have so many sources from where we can get information. Thank you so much, Professor Sahai, for inviting me. I mean, it's also a joy to see that there are multiple perspectives from which today knowledge is looking at user behavior, user purchase processes, their decision-making processes, and it has multiple implications. So today, we are going to approach from the user experience perspective, because that's what I do. It's interesting to know that the word user experience is not new. I mean, experience is something that John Dewey also in phenomenology was studying, of how human experiences happen, how senses contribute to it, how prior mental models contribute to it, how personal choices contribute to it. But the word user experience has gained popularity only recently. I mean, at max 2 decades, and people have started using the word user experience coupled with user interface, UI, UX, and there are plenty of jobs, and there's plenty of market demand for people who can do good UI-based user experiences. And that's the context that Professor Sahai was also talking about, that how UX today has become important because a lot of online decisions and brand influences and choices are being dominated by the experiences that user interfaces are generating. So in a way, the interface is the interface of the brand today has become the user interface, the UI. The keyword here is the user. That's why I'm trying to take a little bit more time on the title itself. That when we say user experience, it's different than a human experience. When we say human experience, we're talking in general about a human being in different perspectives, contexts, situations, amidst different kinds of rituals. But when we say user experience, then we're talking about its usage context. How the human being is using a screen-based application, interactive application, to do certain tasks, and is becoming in the process a user. So the word user is in the context of the usage of some tools, some devices. And that's where the user experiences can be designed, because you're designing not only just the interface, but you are looking at the entire of the experience. And the last part of the title is the persuasive. Now, and that's where, we begin the discussion today. Why I'm bringing this word called persuasive here. Human brain was designed to make choices in nature. And most of those choices were for survival. And the survival instinct dominates decision making. Say, for example, in nature, when fruits turned ripe, they changed color. So nature had a certain design principle because of which it persuaded the human beings to salivate and to consume for its survival. Now the same human brain has moved into a shopping mall, and it's making decisions of purchases. Both cases, there is this persuasion that is happening. So we have 5 senses, and through that, the information is flowing. And that's what designers do. They create the stimuli that impresses upon the brain. It leads to a certain behavioral choice. So in nature, we had this fruits turning from green to, say, orangish or reddish to show that they have become ripe, and therefore leading to salivation. Now, what are those persuasion techniques that work in the decision-making in purchase behaviors? That is specifically that is the topic of the day. And what are the processes that underlie that? In general, facts don't appeal to the human brain. Stories appeal. Emotions play a role in decision-making processes. And understanding why people emote at a certain kind of a display of the product or a certain kind of presentation of the information is what is lying at the core of the user experience design. So let's take a look at these scientific models that we need to therefore use. So we have today this persuasive design challenge where we have to relook at the brain and its decision-making processes, not in the context of how survival instincts dominated, but how the decision-making in the profit, in the context of financial survivals are happening, both offline and online. To begin with, what a UX designer typically does, it first accepts that these decisions are individual and the personal decisions are dominated by personal choices, and they are in turn dominated by the needs and the motivations. So a good point to start for UX design, therefore, is identify what are the motivations of individuals. And there are different models in literature which are available, which tell us about human motivations. So there is one model which talks about there is a hierarchy of motivations. Unless one kind of need is fulfilled, the other kind of need does not arise. And Maslow was one who propagated this idea of a hierarchy of needs, like there is at the bottommost is this physiological needs. You have to first survive. The next is, once that is ensured, then you start getting worried about your safety. And once you have those safety needs fulfilled, then you think about love and belonging, and then esteem, and then self-actualization. I want to spend some time on this model. I mean, this is one of the models which can just lead to a lot of thinking. So when we're creating different kinds of products and we are presenting those products to our buyers, our consumers, this model in a way is arguing that we need to check where our buyers are. If our buyers are stuck at the physiological level of need, then there's no point in selling them an esteem-related product. And if somebody is more craving for love and belonging, and that's where their current motivations in life are, then there is no point in persuading them for self-actualization products. So this model, in a way, gives some direction to how user experiences needs to be approached. So say suppose somebody is at that level of life where, like, been there, done that, I have basic needs fulfilled, and we're trying to like sell them safety products, then it does not create a great experience for them. Another way of looking at this whole model is, can we have the same product designed for different categories of users from a different perspective? Like, say, suppose we take a mobile phone. If I were to design a mobile phone for somebody who's at a physiological level of need, like, say, suppose there is a tea seller who is worried about how much money he can make per day, then the mobile phone has to be positioned from a perspective that this new mobile phone will help you earn more because it connects you to more orders and easy payments and tracking record of your consumers and so on. So we are approaching the same product, which is phone, from a physiological perspective for a buyer who's seeking experience more of satisfaction at a physiological level. Whereas the same mobile phone for somebody who's like a CEO of a company, we cannot position as this is the phone which is going to earn your food, right? Then we need to position this as the phone for CEOs. This is a gold-plated buttons, or it has some specific features and takes care. So design approaches the need of the individuals from these different lenses. I mean, I'm not able to see any chat. Are there anybody who's writing anything in chat?
There is a chat box which is visible to the participants, and you can always invite them to write in on their comments over there as you're speaking. In fact, participants, please feel free to write your comments, observations in the chat as we are speaking, as Professor Kumar is speaking.
Yeah, that at least gives me some sense that it's not a monologue, that there is some audience there. At least say hi. It helps me.
There are more than 90 people out there, so you have a fairly large audience.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dimple. Yeah, helps. Just some reaction coming. And we are talking about user experience design, and then there are experiences on both sides, right? We are all human beings. And feel free to shoot any questions.
Varuna, you might need to enable the chat box. The Q&A is enabled. Can you see the Q&A?
Yes, it's enabled.
So guys, why don't you write your questions on the Q&A? That should also help the speaker to react to any observations and questions that you have. But Varuna, if you can also enable the chat box, that would also be helpful.
Yes, I will action that. Just a minute.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you so much. Yeah, just good to pick up some thoughts from the audience as well. Yeah, so I can see. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Shreya. So I guess I'm making sense what I'm trying to say. Let me go back, because we're trying to dig deeper into something which is a neuroscientific approach to persuasive designs within UX domain. So we are saying that the brain was designed for a certain specific purpose, and that was to survive in nature. That was the first idea I've shared. Second is that nature programmed itself to persuade the human for a certain behavior. Now, once the human beings have moved from the natural jungle to concrete jungle, we are persuading the human beings for certain kind of behaviors, mostly about buying products, about getting engaged with brands, and therefore we are developing newer models and different models of the human behavior and humans needs and desires. And that's in that context we had landed up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's one model, by the way. There are several such models which exist.
So there's one question which has come in. There's
Sure.
one question which has come in which says, okay, in relation to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how does one get to know which category the probable consumer are? Because the pitch or the design has to then address where that person is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks, Tamarai Selvi. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Yeah. This is an excellent question. I mean, I think this is the purpose of sitting together and discussing rather than watching a YouTube video. So I'm pretty excited by the questions that you put in, and I'll keep an eye. Thanks, Professor Sahai, for pointing me to that. So this is the core thing. No matter which model of human motivations you look at, and there are, I think, about 6-7 different models, and all of them are looking at, and there's one research paper which is try to identify 160 odd motivations that a human being possibly can have. And that's the core question that a designer has, that, okay, we have a list, but my product, my brand, my persona. So there's a combination, right? So there is a combination of who's my buyer, and what is the brand I have, and what's the product I'm trying to sell. So brand has a personality, my user has a certain personality, and the two have to
Kind of dropped.
Yeah. And then this product in that context has to appeal, right? So how do we solve this matrix? This is exactly what we are, headed for. Just give me 2 minutes, and I'm going to answer that through my slide decks. So you see, there are different models of human motivations, and each one of them is giving a different list. I mean, not very different, but some of them are giving it a broader category, some of them are going details and so on. I mean, those are the kind of models that are existing. And sometimes they can get confusing. But the point is that on one hand, we have identification of these motivations. On the other hand, we have a set of persuasion tools in literature. And off late, there's just a plethora of books being written on persuasion tools. I think Cialdini started this with his book Psychology of Persuasion, and then Dana really has added more, Predictably Irrational, and so many other books. And they're also being talked about neuro web design. How do we bring this whole knowledge into the context of design? And I want to argue that this is not new. I mean, this has been there for long, and there are companies which are doing processes and systematic ways in which we can achieve that. Now, what is underlying the systematic approach to persuasion design to create good user experiences?
Professor Jyoti, your voice has fallen off.
Oh my God. Is it the internet issue? Am I audible now?
Yes, you are now.
Yeah, my apologies. Probably it's the internet. So do flag if my voice breaks up. Okay, so where do we begin? If you want to solve this puzzle, we have a list of persuasion tools, we have a list of motivations, and how do we say which connect is where this connect is happening? So designers need to have tools of understanding human motivations. And luckily, in research today, we have multiple lenses. I'll just talk about two lenses. One is observation, and the second is deep qualitative interviews. And to my mind, they're complementary. Okay. in observations, you can see the action, what's happening, but you cannot understand the explanation of why your user is making a certain choice. I mean, what was the user persuaded by? What is a piece of information that it's processing, and what is a piece of information that it is overlooking? And why is it picking up certain pieces of information? You know, that question. So you can look, so you can observe what's happening, but you cannot know why it is doing that. So what is visible in observation, but why is not? And that's where the interviews start becoming useful. And now both of these are like sophisticated skills. Like an individual should be trained in how to dig deeper in an unstructured way. And still the best tool. I mean, in a while, I'll move to the neurophysiological tools, and I use several of those tools in my lab, where we put an EEG and galvanic skin response and heart rate variability, and we just get some idea about what the user is trying to do and where the pupil is dilating. But wait a minute, though they are very, very objective, but they still have a tool which is in the human being itself. I mean, we as a human being are a tool to understand the other human being. And still, my favorite tool in identifying which motivation or which level of hierarchy in Maslow's should I cater to, I would still go back to my observation tools and interview tools when I'm trying to like figure that part out. And the skill of sitting down with somebody for an hour and just talking about one instance of decision for 1 hour. And that's the skill I'm talking about. It's like, starting an interview. So you went to the shop and then what happened? And you, you picked up that t-shirt. Tell me more about that. That's it. So I'm going to talk for less than 2 to 5% of the time. And I'm going to make my subject talk about everything that happened. The fragrance, the stimuli, the approach of a person, what all was there in that environment, and what eventually led him or her to make that decision. Now, it was a split second in which that decision happened, but I expanded into an hour and examine it through these deep qualitative interview techniques. So that's in brief my answer to Thammarai Salvi's question. I mean, does it make sense? Do you have further follow-up questions? In the meantime, I'd like to pick up Sana's question. Should I, Professor Sahai?
Please, but do kind of also share a little bit on the overall message on the UX design that you want to share with the individuals. But yeah, absolutely. Please feel free.
Okay, sure. So of course, it's a vast field, and we have too many nuggets of information there. But I would like to be responsive to what the audience questions are. And I was trying to and that's why I've kept this presentation as very, broad and waiting for people to specifically probe me into specific aspects. But share with you that this whole UX design, therefore, happens in an iterative process. I want to draw your attention to two things. I mean, especially for people who are not coming from UX design backgrounds. I don't know how many of you are, but so there are two important ideas that I want to share here. One, UX is a user-centric design process. There is no other way out. I don't think that we can ever have a formula or a matrix by which we can pin down what UX strategies will work for which user groups. This is a step-by-step process where we understand and ideate and create and test. I mean, like, these steps will always be there, and then you iterate. Now, the tools of each one of them could be different for different teams and different contexts for different products. But the broad structure of a user-centered design process is this, that it starts by using some lenses to understand and empathize with the users. So I talked about two lenses, observe and interview, and those are favorite to me. Some other people may use some focus group interviews or contextual inquiry or shadowing or dialogue and so on. There are several such tools which are available. So to empathize. And then in the context of your business, you sort of like define what of these problems am I going to tackle? And then comes the creative aspect of ideating and thinking of different ways to approach that solution. And then is to create some sort of a solution at some level of fidelity, low fidelity, high fidelity, wireframing, different kinds of prototypes that are possible, and then do testing. So this process is central to the UX thinking process. And that's my submission, that though we will have theories evolving about human motivation, consumption process, behaviors, and all of that, but in order to design an artifact, digital or phygital or physical, whatever level, we will always require our process to be iteratively doing user-centered thinking. So I said two concepts. One is user-centered design, and second is iteration. Nobody gets it right the first time, right? Matrix movie. Neo also failed the first time, right? So even the perfect designers are going to fail. And there should be space within the organizational design practices for failures. If we want to achieve great UX, then our design teams have to be empowered and comforted for iterations and failures. That's what I'm trying to argue, that we cannot have a formula of predicting. Now, if you just go back to the first step, empathize, what does it involve? First, the business has to define who's my user category, who's my buyer. And I'm mixing here several things. I'm saying consumer, buyer, user, they're different terms, and they define the human beings in different roles. A user of an interface may not be the buyer of the product, and the buyer of the product may not be consumer of the product. So these are different mindsets. So when I'm saying user experience, I'm still sticking with the user experience, and I'm not going to customer experience for the moment. So when the user is coming to a online setup and is trying to like make a decision to buy a product, then it is behaving with a usage mindset. What I mean by usage mindset is that it is creating task plans in the mind. And this is called task analysis in user experience design. Like, what are the steps I'm going to take? How will I compare to products? How will I drag drop? Will I select through checkboxes? How will I compare vertically or horizontally? What is my preference? So those are the details of the task. And that is what makes the human being a user of the system. So user experience, therefore, becomes different than the consumer experience, because usage is a phenomena where cognitively one is involved with the system and is constantly revising its plans. So user-centered design process and its iterations. Now, there's one question from Sana, which I want to now get into. She's finding it difficult to consider the cultural and individual traits of users when you're trying to like do some kind of a UX work, and especially with context of Maslow's hierarchy. Now, yes, Maslow's hierarchy has been criticized in literature, and there are many people who do not agree with at least the idea of hierarchy. And yes, there are cultural questions that have been raised about it, like the concept of self-actualization in East Asians is different from, say, Westerners. And Richard Nisbet, when he's writing this book called Geography of Thoughts, where he's comparing how the brain is actually processing informations distinctly differently in different cultures. I mean, same piece of information is being looked differently. And in fact, now there are a lot of research available that why website designs or e-commerce designs are different in different parts of the world. And it's got to do with these cultural differences. So yes, cultural contexts of understanding the motivations, there's plenty of literature available. But however, Maslow's hierarchy because Maslow came from West and he had that understanding, but Maslow's hierarchy cannot be completely dismissed. That's my position here. One may or may not agree with its relevance in a particular cultural context, especially like concepts like self-actualization. I mean, if you try to sell something to Gautama Buddha, no matter what persuasion technique you use, it's not going to work. But because the self-actualization in Buddhism is very different from self-actualization that Maslow is talking about in motivational context. A self-actualized person is in no way in need of any identity, through consumption processes. But having said that, Maslow's hierarchy does help UX designers to sort of frame its large user groups and say, what are the basic motivations of my users? And having a user with simultaneous esteem need along with physiological needs is sort of rare in the same brand context, in the same product context. I mean, an Indian user at the time of marriage may behave differently than at the time of, say, going to a tea shop. So the context is different. But when a tea seller is running his business, yeah.
Varuna, is it just me or has Professor dropped off again?
No. I think there's a possible issue at your end, sir, in terms of the network, because I can hear Professor Kumar perfectly well.
Okay. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, sure, sir. Sure. So two things that Sana is questioning. One thing is about the model, but yeah. So this Maslow's model, yes, as just to sum up, it does have cultural limitations, but still for UX designer, see, UX designer is not a cultural theorist. UX designer is not interested as much in the theoretical foundations of its work as the practical implications of its designs. And therefore, sometimes UX designer's choice of research tools is also opportunistic, is driven more by pragmatic thinking rather than a theoretical framework. And I teach in a design school here, and I say there's nothing wrong with it, as long as you are able to justify why you had one choice of one tool versus another. And therefore, if one is using this, Maslow's model, there is no harm as long as it helps you zero in to certain motivations of the users. That will be my take. Dr. Bhavan Bhavsar, please consider a piece of patient engagement in relation to digital health and innovative gamification options. Not able to completely understand your question. I don't know, Varunaji, how do we make him speak? Or
I'll just try to enable that. Just a second. The only way he'll actually be able to is probably just put it back in the question and answer section with some more detail, because we don't have the audio enabled, reasons, because it's a webinar and we have a significant audience around.
Okay, thank you. I'll get back to Mayur, but how can brand managers use deep qualitative interviews for improving the offerings given the paucity of time? Thank you, Dimple, for this question. I mean, it's a very practical question. See, the brand is a shortcut decision making. I mean, how is it that brand plays a role in decision making? It's that users, when they are making a choice, instead of going through the elaborate consideration of various variables in making a decision, they are taking, I mean, this is how I see a shortcut, to make their decisions. Now, we want to understand the aspects of the brand which has helped them come to decisions faster. And yes, deep qualitative interviews is a time-taking process. not only just the data collection, but also the analysis, interpretation, and it has its own challenges of validity and reliability of it. It requires certain expertise and training. But kindly also take a look at this aspect that when you're using a tool like qualitative interviews, you don't need a very large sample. And you're not interested in like establishing a scientific truth. You are interested in peeping through the decision-making processes of, say, for example, a given persona. So if you pick up 6 to 10 people from a very large number, though that 6 to 10 does not completely give you an idea of the whole population, but that deep qualitative interview gives you a very large sample within the interview structure itself. So if you're spending, say, 40 minutes to an hour with a person and observing them in their context, you are getting a probabilistic idea of what are the different variables that are playing a role in decision making. And you're not taking a possibilistic approach to understand all possible ways, but you're looking at, given a situation, how does my user go about? And that lens is useful to you when you start thinking of the design. And that's how the qualitative interviews are helping. So even if there's paucity of time, you look at any great designer. I mean, they always had this kind of an ethnographic style of observations, of going out to the masses, to the people, and just spending some time to get it. I mean, there's no way of getting that data through kind of a form or a survey or any other. So my choice still, even if there is paucity of time, I mean, say, suppose, I mean, in one of my consultancies, I mean, the client was like, we don't have time. I said, good, no problem. We'll come back to you on Monday. And that weekend, I went out, took time from family and went out and did some research. And next Monday, they were like, wow, you have more insight than we have in the Excel sheets. So going out and observing and asking people some probing questions, to me still is very useful. How many research companies innovate products, but that fails in the market? What is wrong with such product design? After many research companies innovate products, but that fails in the market. This is a very deep question and a very profound question that Vikram Handeji is asking. I mean, this is something that excites me a lot. In fact, in some of my courses at IIT Delhi, we take this question that startups failing in India, you know, and it's a global phenomena, and or people who are investing a lot into the research and still we fail. The slide that I've shared that's on your screen right now, I would say that's exactly is my answer. And a while ago, I was discussing that allowing the teams to fail early. If we do not want to accept failure as an important step in the process, and when we are too concerned about succeeding early, then that is a design process which is messing up in itself. So if we have the lenses for empathizing rich, and then we have the business acumen to define the problem, leading to creative people ideating it and prototyping and testing it and iterating it a few times, most of the failures in innovation, to my mind, is happening because we are coming to many important conclusions too early. And we are not saying that, wait a minute, let me test out this first idea, instead of investing ourselves completely into it. And that's why the user-centered thinking process is helping. The other part, when you say research companies, say research, it's one way to look at some companies, a research company, or somebody's doing research. But it's another thing to look at what is the kind of research they're doing, what kind of a tool they're using, what methodologies do they apply. And say, Kale and Carmel did a study, I think in 2011. There was a very interesting study. So they were looking at companies which are succeeding versus those who are failing, and what are the innovation practices they have. And they found 85% of the cases, the success was attributed to this user-centric process, that we spend enough time and resources on this process of understanding, creating and testing and failing that way. There's one question unanswered so far in the chat, that is by Mayuk ji. What would mass prestige products sit on the Maslow's pyramid? See, if you could give an example of a particular product, it will help me, you know. But when we say there is something like a mass prestige, it is a borrowed thing. I mean, I'm seeing others doing and I'm borrowing that. In fact, the whole idea of prestige is a borrowed idea. And so I would say, I mean, this is a new terminology we are looking at, mass prestige, but then prestige is related to mass. If there's no mass, the feeling of the prestige won't be there. So this esteem that we are talking about, that's where it fits in, you know, mass prestige. Because if you look at the whole idea of esteem, what Maslow is saying, and prestige, what you're saying, what is it? It is how others see you. It's not a complete concept in oneself. It's not like how I see myself, but it's about how others see me. And in that context, how do I feel about myself? So that is still borrowed. I'm sorry, I haven't looked into this elaboration likelihood model, so I'm not able to answer that question. So Sahai, I think most of the questions I've answered, most of the slides are done, except a few, just 3 more, and we still have some time. And this is what currently we're trying to do. I deliberately didn't create a lot of heavy slides. I was trying to like just give a big picture and then answer questions. So what we're trying to do in our lab is, let me go back and connect what I'm trying to argue. I'm trying to argue that brain was designed to operate in a certain way. We are trying to use it in another way. And towards that, we are designing products which is specifically appealing to individuals, and understanding individuals, their motivations, it becomes important. We have plenty of literature around that. We have methods and processes around that. And there are specific skills of designers which become useful when they practice in a process, user-centric design process. There's one piece that I wanted to add before we close. And that's where I've been interested for the last 10 years, you know, after I moved from the industry back to the academics. The tools we use to test a product in user experience domain. One of the first tools was called Think Aloud method. This was developed by Nobel laureate Herbert Simon. And he was Nobel laureate in, I think, behavioral economics. And also the father of artificial intelligence. He wrote a very elaborate book on verbal data as scientific. You know, and the argument he gave was that how short-term memory encodes pieces of information while decision making, while thinking. And he said it's possible to make an individual think aloud while doing some tasks. And that gives us a window, a deep look into what the brain is doing. And later on, this think aloud usability technique evolved. And that's what most of the companies today use when they do usability testing. They take up a subject, they make them sit in front of a computer, and then they ask them to do a certain tasks, and while they do the task, they ask them to keep thinking aloud. And as they start thinking aloud, all of that verbalized chunks of information from short-term memory is collected, and analyzed. For example, a typical think aloud behavior will be like, I'm now looking at the screen. I don't know how to click a button. Let me try. And that's the kind of data we get, okay? Think aloud. But there's a catch in this whole method. And that is when the brain is cognitively under pressure, it's thinking hard, then the think aloud behavior slows down, which is obvious, right? Because the brain has to do both things, think as well as think it aloud. And we don't get much idea about what the person is thinking. Now, so think aloud, soon we started realizing, especially in UX domain, that needs to be augmented and supported with some other verbalization methods, which is like retrospective verbalization. But again, there's a challenge when you retrospectively ask the person, one has forgotten about it because one doesn't really remember exactly at that instance what was happening. Then the next step was, how do we cue that behavior? How do we bring certain things in front of the eye so that it relates to it? In last couple of decades, we have another opportunity emerging to peep into the inner processes while making decisions, and that is the neurophysiological data. So today we have plenty of different sensors which are more easily available, and it's possible to get some idea from them by analyzing that. So this is the kind of lab we have here, where we invite a person to do a certain task, maybe make certain choices on a screen, and there's a one-way mirror in the middle, and on the other side we have our researchers who are analyzing the behavior because of the multiple sensors from which we are getting data, and later on also we sit down and analyze. So and another view of the same lab that we have is on this side. So whether a persuasion tool is working or not, why it is working, why it is not working, I mean, those are the deep questions that can be augmented, and we have been publishing around that area specifically. What are the ways in which we can use neurophysiology? Again, neurophysiology is, as Professor Sahai himself runs a neurophysiology lab, so it's a jungle of data. I mean, you have got multiple sensors from which per second hundreds of bits of pieces of information are coming, and in that jungle you have to figure out what was happening. And we don't have a clear models of brain itself available. So it's a complicated problem. But then there are possibilities, and this is where we are currently doing work in our lab, how UX designers can benefit from more neurophysiological data. I think I'm done, Professor Sahai. I mean, I hand back the floor to you. Sir, you're mute.
Professor Jyoti, thank you so much for your very interesting introduction to the area and how you linked it back to the very basic fundamentals of human behavior, which actually is very close to the position that I also take in terms of what is required to create a better UX design, whether it is offline, online. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Because the human brain is the same brain in both the situations. And the idea is to apply it to many different contexts, and some of the later questions which have come up, which I will redirect to you in a moment, but let me also give my own views on that. So for example, if you are looking at a healthcare app or a gamification app, clearly the level of engagement in gamification is going to be higher because your physical senses are also engaged in the game. And if to the extent that you have woven in the factors of persuasion that you are looking at for a particular context, the chances of of a game, other things equal, creating a greater amount of engagement in the brain of the customer are higher, but other things are never equal. And so the challenge in reality often becomes how do you design the overall system so that gamification actually works. And in terms of Gen Z versus Gen Y versus whatever generation that you're talking about, clearly different generations have different levels of exposure to different kinds of media. So a kid who was born in 2005 would probably be much more familiar with a mobile phone. Someone like me is a lot more familiar with larger screen. And therefore, depending on whichever generation one is dealing with, one has to tailor the UX design to that generation. But keep in mind that the human brain is still the same. It hasn't changed, if at all, to any degree, except that the medium to which it responds is different. And therefore, I change the medium. The ultimate stimuli, online, offline, will be a function of the current realities. So, a current realities which gives me an approach behavior to a stimuli might be slightly different from the current reality of 1985, which gives an approach behavior for a similar kind of product. So that's simply an understanding of, again, the human needs and motivation that Professor was already talking about. If you will allow me, Professor Jyoti, I hope to ask you a few questions myself. So I was curious in terms of the UX design process. What are some current areas that excite your interest in terms of UX design research, and why are you interested in those areas? And to tie it in with some of the questions like Gen Z versus mobile and large screen apps versus the mix of qualitative versus online and so on. So if you can just shed some light on that, and I will also add a few words on what stuff that we are trying to do here in Ahmedabad.
Sure, sir. Thank you for that question. Sir, there are two sides of the coin of persuasion, and I'm interested in both the sides. One side is information, until it's presented in a certain way, it's boring to the human brain and does not process it. I mean, even Yashoda had to convince Krishna by persuading him to drink milk, and that's what many poets, including Surdas, has written about it. So I'm saying every mother has to persuade the child to eat. I mean, that's where it begins, right? And if the mother starts saying it has carbohydrates and fats, child won't listen. So it has to tell stories. So persuasion, that's the one side of coin, that we require persuasion on day-to-day and for multiple purposes. Even to run the nation, we need to have persuasive tools in governance, in education, in healthcare, and so on. Okay. The other side of the coin is that persuasion does compromise individual autonomy in decision making, and that's the ethical side of it. So we are looking at the ethical evaluations frameworks for persuasive tools and their usages. So on one side, I am teaching students and also doing research on effectiveness of the persuasion tools. And my specific interest is in societal context, social developmental context. So how do we apply these persuasion tools? For example, I'm working with a very large organization called Common Service Centers. They have presence in about 4 lakh Indian villages. And they are trying to develop entrepreneurial thinking in youth to develop ideas and products. And so I'm interested in how do we use these tools, these methods into the social development context. So that's my answer to my current interests. Yeah.
Very interesting. And just some quick thoughts, words from you on the mix of qualitative tools and online tools in the design of the user experience itself. You did mention somewhere in your talk that for a particular engagement, actual physical visit over a weekend gave you some insights which were better than what was present on the Excel sheets. So would you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, sir. My understanding is that no one tool is sufficient in itself. A mix of methods and an opportunistic mix of methods, a pragmatic mix of methods is what helps a UX become effective and also viable, from a cost perspective, resource perspective, and so on. So when we create teams, especially because I've worked in corporate and I saw that the team composition is very important. What kind of talents and skills are available? And skilling of the teams and creating a culture of the UX thinking to me becomes far more important than the tools themselves. Because once we have a certain kinds of personalities and people who have, that empathetic listening abilities, people who enjoy that, absorb that and bring. And then there's another character who can look at more objective data, can analyze those sheets and charts and make sense of it. So a combination is what would make quality scale up. So there's a two sides of the problem. One, if you want a great product to be there, but second, we want the product to be greatly absorbed in the larger society. So quantitative and qualitative therefore becomes mixed. Now, quantitative data is slightly, less expensive per piece of data, and qualitative data becomes more expensive per piece of data. And that's where the trade-off lies. That and accordingly, I choose how much of qualitative I need. But I would say doing away with any one of them is not good. And now to quantitative and qualitative, we are adding neurophysiological, which further becomes more expensive. But then one last argument I want to give in qualitative quantitative debate is it depends on the brand and the brand context. I mean, not all brands have to invest so much because their context does not require it. So, and that's also ties to my earlier answer to one of the questions that we don't have, blind research doesn't give anything. A very well aware research that what am I looking for? What is my research question? And what tools and methods will help me? That's where most of the challenge is lying.
And that's on that note, I would just take 2 minutes to summarize, which is it goes to the heart of the matter, defining the research question clearly and succinctly and in a way that is connected to the objectives of the particular situation. So for example, there is a question over here from Dhruva Jyoti Sharma, which says empathizing requires a researcher to be effective to the same state of order with the person he or she is, and maybe also about having feelings. Does such symmetry influence these practices? Of course it does. But the whole idea of a researcher is that to some extent one needs to stand at a distance and be able to evaluate such things a little more objectively. So, for example, as a matter of, for the record, we are doing a project on empathy, brand empathy, and whether it actually affects performance of the brand. One first needs to measure what the heck is brand empathy. If you want to be able to say that a brand which is perceived to be empathetic leads to better financial performance or better attitudes towards the brand and so on, first you have to measure it. So therefore, the first question that you ask is, what are the ways to measure brand empathy? Similarly, in a UX design context, if I'm asking the question, which particular design is going to work better for making the customer go to the next page, making the customer buy at that point, making the customer put something in a cart, then I need to evaluate that question in the context of where the customer is in their journey on the website. So most of the times we tend to fall into the trap of just examining that one picture that is there in front of the customer, and we ask ourselves the question, how do I get the stuff into the cart? But the question is actually needs to be preceded by what has happened before he has reached there. And then also some of the questions which came about the motivation, where that person, can I classify that person into some category that allows me to make a particular pitch on a particular screen and so on. So on that note, let me take the opportunity to thank Professor Jyoti Kumar for joining us from IIT Delhi, for sparing his time to talk to you, the audience. We had a high of more than 100 people attending the talk. So that is, by the way, for your record, Professor Kumar, one of the highest numbers that we have had. So clearly the topic that you were talking about and you yourself carry some weight. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting, and thanks to all the participants for taking out time, whom I couldn't see, but thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
So we can stop the recording now, Varuna.
Just a minute, moments are working on that.
And also we can come off.
Yes, attendees are still there. Just give me a second.
We are still recording, I think, Varuna.
Yes, I'm getting Jay to stop.
Okay, I'm going to leave. I'll give you a call in about 3 minutes, Varuna.
Yeah, yes, sir. We can't talk on the webinar. We can talk on another one. हाँ ठीक है. अच्छा वैसे नहीं हो सकता.